I was a little girl, I loved to sift through family photos. I always had a vivid imagination and loved creating stories. The words dwelled right under the surface, sitting calmly like a bowl of eggs, their shells pearly white and cool. If I listened closely, I could hear storylines rumble. When I looked through Dad's pictures from Vietnam, I imagined the things he told me. I could clearly see a Mama San in the village of Hue handing him a ball of rice wrapped in banana leaves, him asking her what held it together, and her telling him fish guts. As a child and now as a woman, his stories intrigue me. The young soldier my dad once was, and how it shaped the man he became. I loved his story describing the bars of jungle chocolate they were issued and how they were more wax than chocolate. You could always tell the villages where the Americans had already been, Dad told me, because when we gave the candy bars to the Vietnamese children, they would throw them back saying, "No thanks, GI." In 1968, at 19 years old, my dad, James Armstrong, was drafted into the Army and did a one-year tour in Vietnam with the 101st Airborne Division. I really liked the idea of Dad being a screaming eagle, and I think that in some ways I've carried with me mythic images of my father in my mind's eye. I can imagine his slim frame and closely cropped hair crawling on his stomach through thick blades of elephant grass while choppers whirled overhead. Blame it on Hollywood, or on my overactive imagination. Dad often talks about his experiences in Vietnam. He shares bits and pieces, moments often encapsulated with humor. I've always listened intently, searching for the heart of the story and trying to understand what my dad still carries with him from Vietnam. However, as Dad has often informed me, there are some things you just can't tell your daughter. But I've always wanted to know more. He told me once, "I thought Vietnam was a beautiful country, blue sky, green and gorgeous, a beautiful country, until they started shooting at me." Another story that I've carried with me for years is about the St. Christopher medal that Dad wore. A father of one of his childhood friends gave him the medal. "Jimmy," he told him, "I know you're not Catholic, but I want you to wear this. It will keep you safe." Dad wore the St. Christopher medal during basic training in jump school, and he continued to carry it around his neck in the jungles of Vietnam. The day before he was slated to come home to the States, the chain broke, and he stuck the medal in his pocket. Dad said that night while in bed, they were hit with rocket fire. The concussion was so big that he flew out of bed and his mattress landed on top of him. One soldier was killed, one lost his leg, and many, like Dad, took shrapnel. The part of the story that always took my breath away was when Dad would talk about the medic walking around poking at Dad's suitcase, a hard-shell American tourister that was riddled with a giant piece of shrapnel from the mortar round. That night, when Dad's dream of the freedom bird that would whisk him safely home was interrupted by rocket thunder, his St. Christopher medal was still nestled in the pocket of his pants, tucked into the suitcase. Dad figured it was either the suitcase or the medal that saved his life. And though Dad never has been a churchgoer, I know which one he believes. I've always carried the story of the St. Christopher medal with me, and one day asked my father where the medal was. He procured it from the basement. It was housed inside a rusted Sucrets tin, and the chain was still broken. My husband polished the medal, and I had the chain replaced, and now Dad, 40 years later, carries the St. Christopher medal with him everywhere around his neck. My dad's military service sparked in me an obsession with war stories. When I started dating my husband Mike, he was a member of the Army Reserve's 652nd Engineering Company. In 2003, Mike's unit was activated and deployed to Baquba, Iraq for 12 months. I remember telling a couple people that my obsession with war stories had probably sent him there. They looked at me like I was very odd. I guess it's one of the curses of being an English teacher and a writer. We live so fully in metaphor, in symbolism. I teach the Odyssey to my 9th grade English classes, and while Mike was in Iraq, I imagined the story of Penelope, waiting 20 years for Odysseus to return from the Trojan War. Penelope sat unyielding at her loom, weaving and waiting, waiting and weaving. That year I carried a rare glimpse into fair Penelope's heart, and too wove for my warrior. I sent a letter off every morning, and every night my tears unraveled, forcing me to start over. The pain is real as the day he left. When Mike returned from Iraq, he carried with him hundreds of photos. But I soon learned the stories were slow to come. I tried to remain patient and allow him to offer up bits and pieces when he was ready. Mike told me the story of the time he and Sergeant Justin Bluba were filling sandbags and were discussing in the oppressive heat of Iraq how they really missed the snow in Michigan. Spying a piece of cardboard, they improvised, and like two little kids, found themselves sledding down a dusty mountain of sand. Mike also often reflects with a grimace about the time he got food poisoning by eating food from an Iraqi vendor. How sicker than he'd ever felt, he drank the Gatorade I sent him in a care package, and how he will never be able to drink grape Gatorade again. Mike and my father both carry with them stories of loss and sorrow. My dad often talks about how he was home on leave from jump school, getting ready to ship off to Vietnam, when the word came that his brother-in-law, John Jacobson, had been killed in action in Vietnam. Dad said he got his orders extended for a couple days so he could attend the funeral, and then he had to report for his service. I will never comprehend how Grandma and Aunt Sharon said their goodbyes to him. One of Mike's stories of sorrow came on Christmas 2003. The 652nd's housing units were hit with mortar rounds. Staff Sergeant Steve Hattemer and Staff Sergeant Tom Christensen were both killed. Mike told me they were two of the best soldiers he had ever served with, and he carries their loss like a heavy burden. My father said something to me that I carry with me every day, and I'll never forget. He told me that no matter how bad things get in life, he reminds himself that nothing will be as bad as it was when he was in Vietnam. He also said that Mike would probably think the same thing about Iraq someday too, but that it would take time. That time has the capacity to do amazing things for a person and helps them heal. He also told me that not a day goes by when he does not think about Vietnam. Now that I'm older and hopefully wiser, I look at my father's photos differently. When I look at the picture of him with the '69 Plymouth Roadrunner he bought when he got home from Vietnam, I believe it's a metaphor for the ghost he was trying to outrun. It is probably one of the reasons that my husband Mike would love to own a Harley-Davidson motorcycle. In his book, The Things They Carried, Tim O'Brien says this about stories. And in the end, of course, a true war story is never about war. It's about sunlight. It's about the special way that dawn spreads out on a river, when you know you must cross the river and march into the mountains and do things you're afraid to do. It's about love and memory. It's about sorrow. Dad has been home from Vietnam for 40 years now, and Mike has been home from Iraq for 5. It was soon after Mike got home that I had an epiphany. Dad and Mike were sitting at Dad's kitchen table together, drinking coffee and smoking cigarettes. They were quiet, but something in the way they carried their silence made me realize they were communicating something deeper than I could understand. I realized that, like Penelope, I will always be in the margins. I watched them, their cigarettes burning like tracers, and I realized that some stories will never be mine, no matter how deeply I reach for them.